Hello everyone, Travis here, and welcome back to my channel, as well as to the world of Open Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. In today's episode, we are actually going to be starting the Alpine area in the back part of the park, and I'm going to re-theme, I guess, this River Rapids ride. And I'm going to begin by taking out this weird-looking building here. Okay, so the ice cream shop is going to stay it's going to stay an ice cream shop. But let me talk a little bit about the theme in this area. So I'm saying Alpine, and that's more or less like the vibe I'm going for, that kind of mountain, foresty sort of feel, right? But some of you are going to look at the architecture today and say, well, that's not really Alpine. That's more like, standard European Tudor whatever style architecture maybe. Or you're going to be like, that's not anything that really exists in real life at all, depending on how you interpret this game. But, yeah, basically this section here where the River Rapids is falls between two themed areas. Well, if we go back to the front of the park, there's like the generic theme, and then we come across through the boardwalk. But if you go the other way, there's like I don't know what to call it. It's kind of a hybrid of generic theming with like the detailing has that kind of, wood trim kind of feel to it, right? And it's like white with red. And so basically this area is between that area and what's going to be the extremely mountainous kind of alpine area. So what I'm doing is, even though this is part of that alpine themed area, I'm making this like kind of fade from the other the themed area into that area. So it's kind of like an in-between area here. Otherwise, the architecture will just get way boring because it's such a big space. So I'm trying to not only blend things in with each other, but also vary the style of architecture enough that we don't it doesn't get overly repetitive. This is a huge map. I know that when you're looking at it, maybe from your perspective, it just looks like any other RCT map. But this is like 200 by 200 tiles. And I know originally it was even bigger than that. I actually made it smaller. So that's probably 4 times the size of a park that I normally build. I usually tend to be right around 100 by 100, maybe 110 by 110. And when you're talking about a grid system like that, when you go out by one tile, you go out by one tile in both directions or whatever, right? So 100 by 100 is exactly a fourth of a 200 by 200 map. So yeah, that in and of itself makes this a daunting project, and it has been from day one, and I mentioned that on day one. But there's been sort of a transition with this park from the beginning, and it's because my style of gameplay has changed a lot, and just in general, the way that I exist in the Roller Coaster Tycoon community has changed a lot. And so when you look at some of the older stuff in this park, it's not very good, and I've gone back and improved a lot of it, but I'm leaving some of that stuff in on purpose. And so when you're looking at the stuff I'm adding and you're going well, that doesn't look like his normal stuff now. I'm doing my best to upgrade and improve certain aspects of it, and especially the newer stuff I add. If you look at the detailing of the buildings that I'm doing now versus the first episode, if you look at the second episode, for example, when I built that ugly McDonald's building that I removed, it wasn't a McDonald's, but that's just the colors were red and yellow and white, and it looked really cartoony and whatever. There's a huge difference in the style of architecture. And the issue with that is, if I don't nod back to some of that architecture like I'm doing with this transition corridor here, it's going to look really awkward, the new stuff side by side with the older stuff. It's going to be did 2 different people build this park? And really, 2 different people kind of did, because I'm a different person in the Roller Coaster Tycoon world now than I was back then. But at the same time, everything has to more or less match. Otherwise, it's just going to look funky and weird. So before you leave hate comments, and if you want to do that, that's great. Leave your negative comments down below. But I just wanted to disclaimer that there's a reason why some of the decisions that I'm making with this are maybe not as high quality as some that I would make in probably any other project I'm working on right now. But you have to understand that this is a project that I've been working on for a really long time. So it's gonna vary when it comes to things like that, you know? The biggest thing that I'll tell you, because I know a lot of you are gonna hate the foliage, because I don't particularly care much for the foliage. There are some areas of foliage in this park that I think are pretty good. And then the vast majority of it, especially around the exterior and stuff, is just tree spam. And I'm not gonna go through and redo all the foliage in this park. One, that's my least favorite thing to do in this game, like in general. Like it's just so tedious, time consuming, boring, doesn't like do anything for me as a player, you know, so I'm just not gonna do it. So when it comes to foliage, I am placing trees and doing underbrush and whatever more or less how I was doing it originally. And originally, I didn't have any custom scenery foliage at all. I obviously did have custom scenery, like objects to use. But when it came to like foliage, I just didn't care back then. Like, I don't know, like it wasn't until years into the project that I was like, oh, you know, foliage matters. And that's kind of something that you develop over time, you know, and I've seen it with people in recent months as well, where I look at some of their older stuff and be like, gosh, you've gotten so much better with your foliage. Because to make foliage look realistic in this game takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. You can't just spam trees everywhere. Unfortunately, I am, 60, 70% through this map, maybe even more, and a lot of it is foliage already. So it would take me probably another year to go back and redo all the foliage. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, again, blend the old with the new. I'm using basically no custom scenery object foliage, even though there are a few plants and stuff in other areas that are CSO. But I'm trying to vary the color and the texture and the shape in a way that doesn't make it look as tree spammy. But at the end of the day, it's still tree spam because that's the style of foliage that this park has. So anyway, what you're seeing on the screen. So this building is starting to take shape. Another thing that I'm going to be doing with this ride in particular is, if you notice, there's a couple of places where right after a drop, there's a turn. And in the real world, that would probably not be a thing. In some ways, that's an effect that they could go for, but in most cases, it's kind of dangerous. And so there are two places in particular on this ride where I'm going to be extending the route just a little bit so that we get a little bit of straight track before it turns. And that I will be doing off camera, as well as touching up the foliage and detailing throughout the entire park, but this area as well. So what you see is not necessarily the finished product, but at least more or less, if you can suspend your disbelief ever so slightly, you can get the general idea of what I'm going for. If you notice, I did some terrain painting under the foliage. That is something I never used to do. Well, not never, but that's something that I didn't do as much before. But it makes such a huge difference in giving variety of texture, color, varying heights and shapes and sizes and all that. So in your foliage, when you're working on that, make sure you use terrain paint. And also, when it comes to doing foliage, take it in small sessions. I got a little spammy at the end of this with the trees and stuff, and I noticed that I was doing that. And so that's when I called the episode done. I just finished spamming as I did, or as I was, with the full intention of going back and making adjustments later. Minor adjustments. It's not going to be a complete overhaul of the area, because again, that's not what I'm doing with this park. My goal is to finish this park, put this project behind me, release it completely so that people can explore it in its entirety and all of that. And it's going to be an exciting day when that comes in the next, few weeks or months or years, depending on how motivated I stay with this game. So if you look at the screen in front of you, you see I am basically painting everywhere that was red before white. I think that is, at first I wasn't liking how it looked at all. I almost completely deleted everything and started over, which in some ways may have been easier, because painting different small pieces in this game can be really, really challenging. You think you're clicking on one thing and then you end up changing the color of another thing and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes starting from scratch is easier. But I liked the overall style and shape of this ride, and so I wanted to keep that and just update it with different colors. to bring the theme, together in a more cohesive way. The white I like because it's high contrast with the brown. It sticks out in the forest, especially, towards the end when I start tree spamming, if you will. You can still see the ride and still see the structure through the trees and, behind the trees and whatever, because the white visually sticks out a lot. So you can see, if you look at this building with the weird looking roof fence thing going on, that I may or may not change. That's the architectural style that we're using for this corridor. That's not going to be the architectural style for the entirety of this themed area. It will have hints of that throughout, just to kind of make everything talk to each other in a good way. But we're going to be going for more like log cabin-y, kind of mountainous sort of look as well. And I'm looking forward to the challenge of blending those two areas together in a way that makes them distinguishable from each other, but also makes it look like one all-inclusive themed area. And you'll see that more mountainous kind of log cabin style of architecture that I'm talking about develop as we go along. We're going to be working in this section for a few episodes at least, because it's a good portion of the map. But you'll see that more and more, especially on the other side of this little river that's at the bottom of the screen. Because that's more or less the Alpine area. That was the original Alpine area. And I just kind of extended it into this area because this area, originally, the theme was very similar to the Western theme that we just worked on last episode, way over in the front of the park. And it didn't make sense to me to have two areas like that. Especially since it's such a specific kind of theme. If it to have multiple generic areas, that's fine. Like I could see that being a thing. But imagine if you have a park that's Western and then medieval and then, generic, and then it has a water park, and then all of a sudden it switches back to Western, like however many acres away. Like that doesn't make any sense. And that's not how real life parks would be. Or maybe, I don't know, Six Flags would probably do something like that. But this is supposed to be better than Six Flags, not quite Disney. So we're kind of in that in-between category with this one. Also, the other thing that I wanted to mention about this park is that realism was not part of the equation originally. And I say that in the first episode if you go back, if you don't believe me. I say that realism is not what I'm going for. I was going for bigger and better and crazier layouts and like all of that stuff. Like that was the point of this park. It was a mega park, right? But my game style, my play style switched to realism a lot more, and I would say semi-realism. Like I wouldn't even call myself a realism builder because I don't care enough about all the details to say that. But so it switched from almost no realism to semi-realism throughout the course of the last couple of years. And you can see that transition if you watch, go back to the first episode and watch it as it progresses. You can see my build style change from episode to episode, especially the ones that are several months apart when I would go through dry spells, right? You can see that things are changing in my methods. I also think that this bench is a disaster because when I first started with this park, I didn't even know what a workbench was. I had heard it referred to in the community, and I knew more or less that it described the objects available in a park, but I thought that workbenches could only be the official ones, the Lewis workbench or the Pro Tour whatever workbench. And I thought those were the only ones that were considered workbenches, and that any other park was just a park, or a scenario or whatever. And, so when someone would ask, what workbench did you use? I'd be like, oh, I didn't use a workbench. I just used a bunch of random stuff, which is how I used to put parks together. I would go through and put all the objects that I wanted one by one and pretty much ignore scenery groups, which created an issue where almost everything is in the question mark category, the miscellaneous objects category, and that makes it so hard to find stuff. So hard. Not to mention so many things are missing. And so that's another thing when it comes to being motivated in this park, is that it takes a lot of extra work that I don't really have to worry about in other projects. But anyway, so the fact that it started not realistic and has transformed into this more semi-realism kind of feel, I'm having to, like, again, bridge the gap between the two. And so, like I said, I'm not going to go back and delete and redo everything. I am upgrading and updating areas that I think are just way too, like, far off. Same thing with the foliage. I've already updated foliage in some areas, and I will be updating foliage in other areas as well that I think that, like, is just way too not good. But I'm not going to be doing that with all of it. I'm wanting to leave some of that jank in. I'm wanting to leave some of the earlier stuff in so that people can explore and see, like, oh, hey, this was done in episode 6 and this was done in episode 26. Wow, what a difference. And, like, that's, like, to me, that's the point of a project like this. So, yeah, that's my spiel. But anyway, looking at this building in front of you, some of you might be like, what the heck is this backside thing going on? It's something I've been doing, and I did it in the western area as well. That's a show building with a facade on the front. This backside, it uses that green, or sometimes gray, but I like to use green a lot because it blends in with the foliage more. The idea is that the backside of this building would not be seen by the guests, and you hide it, like, with fences and with, foliage and whatever else to get rid of, like, that sight line for the guests. And you only focus on what they can actually see. Make that look pretty. That's a lot more realistic. And that's something you'll continue to see as we move along with the project, and I may even go back to some of the older structures and design them that way as well, just to make everything cohesive in that way. But yeah, so anyway, we've obviously come up to the end of this video, so I hope you didn't hate my ranting too much today. I just wanted to explain where this project is at, where we're going with this project, why certain things are and why certain things aren't happening. And, I'm glad that there's finally some movement and some progress in this park, because eventually it will be finished. And I hope you're as excited for that day as I am. But anyway, give this video a thumbs up if you like what you see. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what your thoughts are on everything. Likes and comments really do help us YouTubers. It gives our video more activity, which the algorithm then, like, hopefully will think that it's better. I don't know. But yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. And with that said, you all have a great morning, afternoon, evening, night, etc., wherever you are in the world. And I will see you all next time.